Well, hello. My name is Dr. Reed Tuckson. I'm the co-founder of the Black Coalition Against COVID and board chair of the Coalition for Trust in Health and Science, a unique organization that, for the first time in history, brings together the entire health ecosystem for one simple purpose: to help people make best possible health decisions based on science and evidence. Welcome to another in our BDO series of vaccine confidence webinars focused on helping health professionals to assist people in making science-based, personally appropriate preventive health decisions for themselves, their families, and the communities in which they live. The show is entitled Vaccine Confidence, and this is part two. I want to thank our sponsor, Moderna, for their support. To begin our conversation, I offer our audience four contextual points that will frame our conversation with our special guests. Number one, the realization of the intensifying challenges that continue to frustrate our ability to achieve meaningful levels of vaccination against COVID and other preventable illnesses that are preventable by vaccines. Number two, according to the Infectious Disease Prevention Network, there are at least 380 bills currently in play across the country that are related to vaccine policy, 75% of which, unfortunately, are anti-vaccine. Number three, according to an ongoing poll by our friends at BDO, when their audience is asked if they are confident that you can detect misinformation when you see it online, 485 respondents, or 52.4%, said yes. But regrettably, 440 respondents, or 47.6%, said no. And number four, and finally, as we are well aware, COVID is still with us, sickening and killing people here and around the globe. It is important that we be reminded that just this week, the CDC's Special Committee on Immunization Practices has told us that we now need to give a second shot of our COVID vaccine for older adults and people who are immunocompromised, which includes people with type 1 and type 2 diabetes, people who are pregnant, people with cancer, chronic kidney or lung diseases, and people who are obese. These are now encouraged to get 2 shots a year because not only of the increased risk of severe disease from COVID in older adults and the immunocompromised, but also because we now are aware that we have year-round circulation of the COVID-19 virus. And so we really need to protect people across throughout the year. Well, joining me for this discussion on increasing vaccine confidence are three excellent subject matter experts. First, let me introduce my friend, Dr. Oliver Brooks. He is the CEO and Chief Medical Officer and past Chief of Pediatric and Adolescent Medicine at the Watts Healthcare Corporation. Dr. Brooks is past president of the National Medical Association and a long-term leader of the California Immunization Coalition, chair of the Immunize LA Families Coalition, and in 2022, Oliver was appointed as a member of the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices for the CDC. We are also joined by Todd Wolin. Todd is the executive director of the Trusted Messenger program of the Public Goods Project. Prior to that, this physician was the CEO of Kids Plus Pediatrics in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Todd has worked in the field of vaccine policy and administration for more than 27 years as a clinical vaccine researcher, as an immunizing pediatrician, as a vaccination communication and disinformation researcher, and as a vaccination advocate. Later in our conversation, we will be joined by our friend Synovia Moss, who is the CEO and managing partner at Moss Consulting and Management Group. There, she has been very much involved with a national program called Good Health Wins, run by the National Council of Negro Women. Good Health Wins is a short version of Women's Immunization Networks, and Synovia is really a leader in that work. She translates her expertise in leading large-scale community engagement initiatives by leveraging trusted community voices, including sororities and other social organizations, to empower communities with accurate health information, address vaccine disparities, and build trust to improve health outcomes nationwide. To my panel, thank you, and I appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Great. Well, to begin, thank you for that as well, Oliver. To begin our conversation, let's start with lessons that we learned from the pandemic. I think that you all will appreciate, and I hope that our audience understands, that for the first time in history, we actually, in the Black community, closed the disparities gap as represented by primary series vaccination. Unbelievable given how far we had to come and the obstacles that we had to overcome. Let me start with you, Oliver, and make sure that we understand, what are the kinds of lessons that we learned about what worked well and what could we have done better?
All right. So, interesting question. Great question, Dr. Tuxton. I think what worked well is there is an early understanding that there was the disparity in COVID illness treatment, uh, COVID testing, and COVID vaccination. It was also understood that there was misinformation, and that was a major part of it. I would think, however, the most important thing that we learned, and it was important, is that there was an understanding of what happened and why there was mistrust in the Black community regarding a new vaccine. My point is that we delved into it. There was this comfort with the medical profession, with the pharmaceuticals, but we really dug in to see why and what we could do about it. Otherwise, it was just always dormant, if you will, is the way I looked at it. So, with the looking back and the understanding that it was legitimate for African Americans to have concerns regarding the healthcare industry, and I'll call it on both the production side and the service side, physicians and other providers, we addressed it. I think that what we didn't do as well as we could have in the beginning was to get past it and get to the next step. So we got it out there, it was clear, but it took a while for us to narrow the gap and actually eliminate the gap in vaccine coverage rates. I would also say that we started to understand what we really need to do to get African Americans comfortable with the science, comfortable with understanding what truth versus untruth or falsehoods are, and then making the critical step in getting the community vaccinated and having a better understanding of COVID-19 as a disease entity.
I know that you spent a lot of time, working in the Black community in California and around the world, Oliver. And I'm sort of wondering when you say we really needed to identify early on the legitimate mistrust that had come from centuries of bad insults, bad behavior, and we all know that the healthcare system oftentimes continues to not treat people of color as we would all hope they would, and certainly not equal to other population groups. As we kind of got into understanding that, what do you think was the key to, at least where we were successful, how did we kind of overcome some of that earned distrust and move us to a place where people were willing to accept the advice from clinicians and scientists?
Right. I think the first was acknowledging it, that it just wasn't fanciful. Oh, those people just don't like us. Digging into it, seeing that the northern medical schools came down to the enslaved grave sites and took cadavers back to work in their medical schools, to seeing the W. Marion Sims, the Dr. Sims, the quote unquote father of OBGYN, who had a statue in New York that was taken down because we understood that he was operating on a African American female enslaved without anesthesia. Understanding that the United States Public Health Task Force work at Tuskegee was real. So realizing that, there are these real actions and many, many more. There's a book called Medical Apartheid that details all of this. Addressing that and then saying, but this is the deal. So, for example, I, at that time, was president of the National Medical Association. We met with Pfizer. It was just at that point, Pfizer and Moderna. We met separately with them and brought the concerns that we had. There were concerns about fertility. There were concerns, that whether real or not real, about a microchip. There were concerns that it was experimental, that Black community was getting different lots. So we met with them and categorically brought these things up, and they were able to categorically deny them. And then we were also part of the clinical trials, bringing the vaccines out. So when we could get all that information, throw that out to the public, to the African-American public, and to the public in general, I believe that helped us get over the bridge and move toward a better, clear understanding of rational, scientific, medical, pharmacological information that got
Good.
us to where we are now.
Now, Todd, if we step back and look at this, not just through the lens only of of minority communities, but the nation as a whole, we also had a lot of work to do as well. And we certainly know that we had some real challenges. I'm wondering what you think, as we look at it from a bigger picture, what worked well and what we have done better initially.
Yeah, to Dr. Brooks' point, the mis and disinformation has really put us into a situation that shouldn't be. If you think about the pandemic, as horrific and as horrible as this was across the world, particularly to marginalized communities, the one silver lining was it was a chance for the world to see what it's like to face a novel infectious pathogen or virus that we have no memory to, no immunologic memory. So this was a chance to see how bad it could be. But before we could even do that, the anti-vaccine industry had already taken hold of the message and started talking about it isn't real, or it was launched in a lab, or all these things. And don't forget, the COVID vaccination was the first vaccine to be attacked before a vaccine even came out, right? So rather than celebrating, going from March of 2020, when we realized now this is hitting us hard, to December of 2020, when you can start getting it under an EUA, like this, you guys remember the protective rates of that first initial vaccine against the ancestral strain. It was mind-blowingly effective, and yet we couldn't celebrate that because we were already having an incredible amount of disinformation. And what I will say to the audience is, as much as the internet was supposed to be this amazing thing with all the information we could want at our fingertips, social media through geo-targeting delivers you your own special slice of hell. So if you are in the Black American community, you sure as hell are going to get Tuskegee imagery. Or the Somali population, you're going to be told that they're coming to kill immigrants. Or Orthodox Jewish population, they're going to come out and they're going to evoke other fears. That's how good social media is in terms of being misutilized or purposely misutilized by the anti-vaccine industry. So what we've lost was the opportunity to get ahead of this messaging, to celebrate the science on how well we had done, and for sure as heck to be able to overcome the fear that people were instilled with before we even got a chance to define the conversation.
Great. And by the way, if you had to, in that context, think about something that we just wish we had done better right at the beginning, is there anything in retrospect that you can think of?
Yeah, I mean, for those of you who don't know my story, I'm a pediatrician in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We created a video on HPV vaccination in 2017, and we're the recipients of a global anti-vaccine attack. We're in Pittsburgh. Not one attack came from Pittsburgh, but 10,000 attacks came from Texas, Ohio, the Czech Republic, Ireland, New Zealand, and Australia. In 2017, we were raising red flags and ringing the bell saying the anti-vaccine industry is incredibly well immersed into social media. And this is before it got politicized and polarized. So to Dr. Tuckson, to your point, where we should have learned was we are not using communication in a powerful way as healthcare professionals. We aren't trained in it. Nurses aren't, pharmacists aren't, physicians, physician assistants, and nurse practitioners. None of that is in our training. And I just want to say one more thing. We have hundreds of billions of dollars going into research and development. We came out with a vaccine within 9 months that we could use. It's no longer a matter of can we do things with the science if people don't trust the vaccines or the medicines or whatever it is.
Understood. Thank you. I've already introduced Synovia to the audience, and we're talking about now what we have learned in the very early stages. And I made the observation, Synovia, that for the first time in history, the Black community was able to close the disparities gap in record time. Also, in addition to closing it, but in record time, as represented by primary series vaccination rates. I know that a big part of the success that we had was by working with our organized community. And there were none, I think, stronger than our African-American fraternities and sororities, area and space that you know well. Would you share with us your impressions of what contribution did our social infrastructure make and what were the keys for them to be successful at advancing the mission, advancing the information, and advancing acceptance of the vaccine? And I hope they'll take you off mute so that you can answer that. And hold on, let's get her off mute. And if that is you, Synovia, or if it is the studio that can get you off mute, let's see.
Here we go.
There we go. Okay.
Good evening, Dr. Tuckson and everyone joining us tonight. Thank you on behalf of the National Council of Negro Women. Always an opportunity, a wonderful opportunity to partner with BDO on information sessions like tonight. So when you think about from the perspective of community-based organizations, we at the National Council of Negro Women, we actually were able to galvanize a very large infrastructure to help with the pandemic response, which we now call Good Health Wins, comprised of 40 state and national organizations, including the Divine Nine. So yes, we were able to very quickly galvanize our community. And I think that some of the lessons that we've learned from the pandemic around the CBOs, which is a stakeholder group that really hadn't had a voice in this ecosystem. The CBOs were quickly, they were able to quickly
establish. And by the way, that references to community-based organizations, and FBOs is faith-based organizations. Please continue.
Yes. Okay. So one of the things we saw in our CBO network was that we were able to quickly establish these local community vaccine clinics, the partnerships, and we were able to leverage the trust of these organizations that were already in communities doing lots of health-based and social service work. So we were able to partner, as all of these CBO groups who did, the churches, the rec centers, the schools, that we were able to overcome barriers very quickly that we saw happening in our communities. I think the second thing that the CBOs did extremely well is that we have the ability to have a rapid response and the flexibility to what was going on during COVID. So we were very instrumental in mobilizing those resources, staffing things very quickly, working hand in hand with public health agencies to offer those immediate vaccination services. But then also I would say that the other thing that we brought key was the cultural appropriate messages and messengers. So it wasn't just what was said, it was who was saying it as well. And so working with all of the community leaders, the faith leaders, and local influencers to develop those messaging, but also just tailoring the language, the visuals, that it looked like us, by us, for us, that we were able to tell stories that really resonated and targeted with the community. So CBOs were really good at building trust, localizing the knowledge. I would say that if there's anything that we need to do better, I heard that as your earlier question, is that we have to sustain this engagement. That COVID brought us all to the table, and now that we have that somewhat under control, I would say COVID brought us into the vaccine space, right? But now these groups and organizations, when that funding ended, we have to be able to sustain that engagement. And so some of the things that we've done at NCNW is to be able to keep our groups together. We have a bi-monthly community of practice. We've had over 85,000 people on the call, and we're still getting 750 to 1,000 people bi-monthly. So we have to sustain the engagement and keep these groups at the table around building vaccine confidence.
Beautiful. And by the way, I would make note that colleague organizations of yours and mine, like the Choose Healthy Life faith-based initiative, have been pushing very hard in Congress for a bill that would give us sustained funding for community-based infrastructure, so that we don't have to keep starting from a standing start every doggone time. Every time there's a new disease issue or a new health crisis, we need that sustainable funding. So thank you for making that point. Oliver, let me talk about this notion of enhancing trust. I think that we know that Black health professionals partnering with the National Council of Negro Women and many other organizations, faith-based organizations, we do have a great opportunity. But what do we need to do, and what can we do more for our physician and health professional community, our nurses and others, to be able to translate more of that trust into a relationship that moves people where they need to be moving, using evidence to make personally appropriate choices and decisions?
Right. So a lot of excellent points have been made. I just want to underscore one that Dr. Wolin said: social media. So we weren't trained in that. So I'd say docs, healthcare providers, Black healthcare providers need to get better at using social media. I mean, you get your grandchildren and your kids to help you with it. Partnerships, what Ms. Moss said, crucially important. I'm on the ACIP. I was a practicing pediatrician. I retired from that. I could tell you all the science. I could tell you all the data, but I could not probably get it out there the best that I could. So I think that the healthcare community, the professional healthcare community, first of all, has to know the science.
Excuse me,
I
Oliver, if you hold on
I
just 1 second. Hold on 1 second. For my colleagues, because it's a little bit of a noise, if you put yourself on mute when you're not speaking, it may help us out. Oliver, you
Sure.
were finishing a very important point.
Right.
Please continue.
So I think that first of all, we need to be experts. I teach a couple of courses at a school you might be familiar with, Charles O. Drew University of Medicine.
I used to be
And
the
what I
president of
teach
that university.
what I teach the students is no matter what, you have to be an expert at your craft, which is being a physician. So first of all, you have to be an expert at your craft. And if we're talking about this, you have to understand vaccines and understand COVID. And then you have to understand your audience. So the simple concept of there's a basic concept called presumptive versus participatory action in vaccinating. So you walk in and you say, okay, by the way, Mrs. Jones, you need your, we need to order a mammogram for you. We also need to go in and order your flu vaccine and your COVID vaccine. That's called presumptive. I'm presuming you're going to get it. Versus, okay, you don't say to her, do you think you want your mammogram? I'd be almost tantamount to malpractice. So no, you say, do you want your you need to get your mammogram. Participatory. By the way, if you're up for a flu vaccine and a COVID vaccine, should we get it for you? You're now having her participate in the decision. We don't do that. You have pneumonia. Would you like me to treat your pneumonia? We don't say that. So we have to learn techniques to get over the bridge.
Wow.
And we have to be comfortable with what we're talking about. There are some doctors that were not comfortable with the COVID vaccine. The patient can smell a rat. So you have to know what you're doing, feel comfortable with it, and the patient can sense it. Then it's all about communication.
So we're going to have to really pay attention, I think, Oliver, coming out of this, to our continuing medical education programs, but heck, also what we teach in medical school and residency programs. So thank you. Before I come to you, Todd, on that, let me turn to Synovia for a minute and ask you a tough question.
Okay.
And it's going to be a hard one to answer. One of the things that we have proven to be good at is reaching those of us who are in organized groups like fraternities, sororities, NAACP, church. There are a whole lot of African Americans who are not part of those groups. They're living in unincorporated zones, and they've been very tough to reach. Any thoughts about how we can start to engage in a more trusting, collaborative relationship with people who are not in our major organizations?
So one of the things that we do with our trusted messengers is we provide a lot of education so that we know that they can trust or reach those who are not in those organized groups. So I'll tell you a story about, we did a community of practice, and we were talking about respiratory season. And one of our colleagues came back to us and said, I had that conversation at a bus stop, and there was a hesitant person. I was able to explain to them about the importance of the vaccines and encourage the people at the bus stop to get the vaccines. And she literally went to the doctor, to the vaccine site with the person who was afraid to get it. So it's going to take a lot of those personal kinds of actions that individuals, but if you train those, in our network, we have 4.5 million. Those 4.5 million have brothers, sisters, cousins, colleagues, and that's what we encourage them to do, is to go out and reach those where people stay, play, pay, pray. That's what we say to our groups.
I thought it was going to be a hard question, but obviously I didn't know who I was dealing with. That was beautiful.
Okay.
Todd, as we look at this notion of trust between clinicians and health professionals, this is not just about Black physicians and Black nurses talking to Black patients. This is about the entire profession. How do you look at this issue of gaining or maintaining trust as health professionals? And you might take off mute. Thanks. It's because I made you do it. My bad.
I forgot. Here's the great news. Year upon year, even post-pandemic, if you look at polling data, people continue to rank healthcare professionals as the most trusted. Actually, nurses up here, and then followed by physicians. So if you break physicians out, pediatricians are pretty close to nurses. Followed like by Sith Lord and then member of Congress. But anyway, the deal here is we have the trust, but we squander it very much because exactly what Dr. Brooks said. We aren't trained in speaking and communicating using best practices. The anti-vaccine industry put two wedges in place purposely by design. One, they put a wedge between people and facts, right? People are like, I don't know what to believe anymore. The second wedge they put in is between healthcare providers and their willingness to speak up. And when I speak to large healthcare audiences now, I say, raise your hand if you feel like you've been attacked or harassed or abused. Most do, because people will tell you, I don't even like to bring up vaccines anymore because I don't know where that person is with it. But it's the same thing. Like you would make a presumptive recommendation, just like Dr. Brooks said, about you need to get your mammogram. But now people are like, do you want to get the vaccine? Okay, you don't want it, that's fine. And check the box, at least I offered it. No, I mean, this is the deal. We have the trust, but we need to take back the relationship, that trusted relationship we have with our families. And in a way that we can help them get to their own personal decision that's hopefully evidence-based. Now, that requires training. And so my career now has shifted primarily to healthcare training and healthcare providers with a big H, doctors, nurse practitioners, physician assistants, pharmacists, lactation consultants, all the way to community health workers, because we're all part of a healthcare team now. But not only do you need to make a presumptive recommendation, again, if you guys think about it, we used to say, Susie needs her TDAP and her meningitis. But when HPV first came out, we say, and her HPV too. And parents would be like, well, I'll get the first two. You sounded much more confident about those. I don't know about that HPV one. And if you think about it, the CDC came back and said, here's some evidence. Put HPV in the middle of that for adolescent vaccines. Today, Jimmy needs his TDAP, his HPV, and his meningitis. My cadence of my voice was straight. I was confident about the recommendation. That was a communication tactic that was put in that was not nefarious. It was something straight up. It's just like, here's how you make a recommendation, feeling good about the whole thing so that people perceive that you were confident about all those vaccines. But what if you are faced with disinformation or misinformation or reluctance or hesitancy or whatever you're going to call it? We walk into the exam room every day unprepared for that situation, which scares people. Healthcare providers were not trained, so we do one of two things, and they're both wrong when somebody's already reluctant. If you say, I don't know if I want that, we'll go, well, let me tell you about the study, and they start telling you about 95% confidence intervals, and you're like talking up here like you're talking to a resident instead of your patient. Or the second thing you do is you take out the scary picture. You want to see what could happen if you don't vaccinate? So you use fear, science or fear, both wrong. What you need to do, and there is data showing that physicians are the biggest offenders here. We interrupt our patients within like 23 seconds. You need to use some active listening. So I teach a mnemonic that, again, there's all sorts of different ones, but I teach AIMS: announce, presumptive announcement; I, inquire; M, mirror; S, secure. I, can you tell me what's the concern you have about that HPV vaccine? Well, my sister-in-law posts on Facebook, that's the one that makes you sterile or that can sterilize kids. M, mirror. Let me mirror your words back to you. So I don't say, let me mirror. I just say, so let me make sure I got this straight. Your sister-in-law posted on Facebook that that's the vaccine that can sterilize kids. Is that right? And they go, yeah. Right there, you used active listening. You've demonstrated now that they know that you know what scares them. And for Lord's sake, you can take time and express empathy. And you could say, you know what, if I thought that was true, that would scare the hell out of me. Can I tell you why I got my daughter or my kids vaccinated, or why I got vaccinated? You can literally move yourself around the table to be on their side. And let's not be shoehorned by the anti-vaccine industry into you're like a vaccinator and that's all you do, right? We've all taken care of sunburns, sutured up wounds, dealt with pneumonias and reflux. I don't just give vaccines. Everything I've done for you has been evidence-based. This is just one more thing.
I love that. I want to turn to Synovia in a second here, and I want to get into some of the misinformation challenges in the Black community. But before I do, Todd, you said something I just want to underscore. And there's a lot there. I am sure many clinicians, health professionals in our audience right now who are struggling with that fear factor. We saw tragically in the hurricanes just recently, where different first responders had to be removed from their work because of fears of organized militia acting on misinformation. This sense of the attacks on our scientists and attacks on clinicians and medical practices, all of these are contemporary. And I think that one of the things we have to recognize, and I continue to go back to the oaths that we took when we graduated, this is a calling. We have accepted a calling. Regardless of our discipline, those are ethical pronouncements. And we don't have the luxury of being afraid or intimidated, although it is real, and we've got to have to address that. But I'm sure your comments resonated. And I would just say to our colleagues there that we have to support each other in every way that we can, but we have to do our jobs, because we have learned tragically that the price of failure is death. Zenobia, when you think about your work at the community level, you've had to, I'm sure, encounter all kinds of misinformation. What was your reaction? How did you and the National Council of Negro, how did you all start to work through that? And what do you think are some of the solutions for how we can try to overcome this misinformation?
Well, first of all, I would say I wish every patient would encounter doctors like you all, and we would be further along in this journey. One of the things that we very quickly saw at the council is that there was a lot of misinformation and disinformation. And so we created a certificate program, 6 certificates this year. This is actually our second year doing it. Over 5,000 trusted messengers went through the certificate program, where we did a deep dive on misinformation, disinformation. We had an opportunity to talk about the science of vaccines from the perspective of African Americans. We did lots of conversations around how do you take this information and then become an advocate around the information that you've learned. So we talked about the advocacy spectrum with them. But all of that to say is that we've empowered them so that, wouldn't it be nice to walk into a room and our campaign is ask every time. We are empowering you as a patient to say, ask, do I need a vaccine? Every time you see a doctor, and every doctor that you see, not just your primary doctor, because you never know where they are in the series. So I think it is an opportunity for us to think about not just the doctor side of this, but also the patient empowerment side to help bring that and bridge that gap.
I like that, the patient empowerment side. Let me come back to you, Todd, for a minute. And I want to get, since you are, make sure our audience understands the Public Good Project is probably the place that at least I go to when I want to understand what's happening nationally around misinformation. What are the trends? What can we learn? And so from your perspective, Todd, what is the status of how you see the curve, the trend of misinformation, and again, how do we start to think about how we can begin to overcome that? And you can take off mute again. And you've been so good about following orders. Thank you.
You think I've learned? It's 2024. We've only been doing it for 4 years. What I was saying is, I think you and I should talk again in a week after what happens next week goes away, because right now there is so much mis and disinformation. But recognize, right? That's what's happened. For the first time, right? We've been dealing when it comes to vaccines with mis and disinformation since the first vaccine back in the 1700s. And all the way up until the late 90s, when there was this guy named Wakefield who was trying to make people think that there was autism tied to vaccines, which there is not. It was still very fringy, right? It was fringe on the left, like toxins and, unsafe chemicals, and fringe on the right, where it was like liberty, don't you tell me what to do. But something changed when the pandemic hit. And what happened was that the anti-vaccine community and industry teamed up politically and polarized science in a way that made science now not a safe haven. Used to be that everybody could get behind. When the polio vaccine came out, people locked arms and marched across the United States and collected March of Dimes, right? And then all of a sudden, it was divisive to protect people from disease. And I've seen Dr. Offit and Dr. Hotez present and bring up scientific literature based on your political affiliation, your chance for death. That's something crazy. We hadn't seen that before. So I do want to point out there's we aren't trained in communication. We also aren't trained in the power of narrative. The anti-vaccine industry comes into this under a cloak, a veil of altruism. We're trying to warn you guys so you don't become magnetic, or you don't become nanochipped, or you don't become whatever. But we don't ever say, we healthcare providers use the narrative of, hey, did you know that the anti-vaccine industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry? They push disinformation for 3 reasons. The 3 Ps: profit, don't use this vaccine, but use my oils or my crystals; politics, vote for me, and I'm going to get one of those 380 bills we were talking about. I'll get them to stop making your kid have to get vaccines. By the way, 50 states now have legislation to get rid of school mandated vaccines. Or the 3rd P, so you got profit, you got politics, and you got power. They push disinformation because they can control trending conversations. And if you can control the communication, and by the way, this sounds crazy, but hostile foreign countries, and I'm saying this is for real, use disinformation to create chaos, particularly in democracies with free speech. They do this on all issues: vaccines, Second Amendment, BLM. And the crazy thing is, they take out accounts on both sides, pro and anti, and start dropping in some crazy comments in there. But you have this notion of what's called tribalism. You believe people if they're already in your crochet or cooking group on Facebook. And so they know how to control messaging. We haven't been taught how to counteract it.
So Oliver, as you sort of sitting there in California, you're in Long Beach, your work is also in Watts, South Central LA, a microcosm of the Black community. And I imagine that you have had to overcome some of this inundation with misinformation from all sources. What is your perspective, and what have you been seeing?
I've been seeing in the beginning significant issues, but it's a lot better now. I mean, I have to say, I am optimistic. I have seen through the years of about January, I think, of 2020, which is when it really hit. First, I won't say a denial, but a lack of a real understanding of how significant the condition could be. COVID is like the flu. I said, okay, well, flu is pretty bad. That argument really doesn't work, but the flu is pretty bad. So that's one thing that I had issues with. And the flu is like a cold, so COVID's like a cold. Then again, the concern about the fact that the vaccine, there was different lots of the vaccine for the Black community versus the majority community. That's pretty much gone. Then, the thing with the syphilis experiment, they're giving it to us to harm us. And my statement was, in the syphilis experience, they withheld treatment. Mm-hmm. This is getting treatment. So understand that there's a major difference. But what I'm seeing now in the Black community, kind of the statistics show the Black community is more concerned about getting sick from COVID than any other community. Mm-hmm. And now is as likely or more likely to want to get vaccinated. So that's what I'm saying. One of the things, and as I think through all of this, is the Black community is evolving. And it's been refreshing to see that evolution is because of people like Miss Moss, Dr. Wallen. And it's not just Black folks helping Black folks. There's a number of individuals and organizations that care about people, humans.
That's it.
And that also has been a big part of it, that there's a collaborative effort from those that are ultimately healers.
We are all in this together. You know, it's funny you mentioned the Tuskegee experience. It's funny. I had a chance to do a video with descendants of the families of the
Wow, really?
And it was very interesting to me that they were livid.
Excuse me while I do this.
They were livid that people would use their ancestors' misery and suffering to hurt Black folks. All of them were vaccinated. And so the point that they made was, of course, is that the insult was that as you have said, Oliver, we were denied access to the drug that would have saved us. So therefore, it makes zero sense to say, I'm going to protest that by denying myself access to the drug that would save my life. It doesn't make sense. Zenobia, as you sort of think about the challenges of overcoming some of this, here we had a marvelous genius of the American scientific and the world scientific mind that could produce a safe and effective vaccine in such a short period of time. This is an overwhelming intellectual achievement. And yet, in our community at the beginning, so many people saw this as someone trying to hurt us. How do you think we can start to do better at being able to prepare our community for science-based breakthroughs, of which there are going to be many, many more, thank God, coming forward?
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you to doctors like Dr. Brooks, who came on numerous times to the Good Health Wins Network so that individuals could hear from doctors in real time. And that was something that was very substantial about building the trust. And then getting the success that we found around engaging the influencers, using the faith leaders. So when people saw, say, the D9 presidents create PSAs that were consistently given to their membership, that resonates back into the community. So we're starting to think about, our role and our positionality around this space. And as CBO organizations, many of us are already talking about how do we not just get prepared, but stay prepared for future public health emergencies. We're talking to our CBO organizations around putting vaccine confidence work in their health platforms around their organizations. And so for us, it's very important to be able to integrate the lessons learned about resilience, about community engagement and partnerships, about the social determinants of health into our public health strategies. We saw that our groups, and we have currently about 2,000 mini grants on the ground right now, our groups are already combining vaccine confidence work with the social determinants of health. So they're already doing vaccines and voting. Can't separate it because this is very critical right now. They're already looking at, if they're doing water projects in Flint, Michigan, how is it important to bring that? When they give out the water, they're giving out the vaccine schedules. So we're not making assumptions that people know what they need to do, but really making sure that we're always leveraging our power, our influence, our information all the time, not sometime. Now we're trying to get our groups to keep it going all the time.
So one of the things we
Mhm.
got to do, Synovia, it seems to me, that comes out of this and is finding, again, more and more ways for our health professionals to
Yes.
partner with this full range of our community and faith-based organizations. And you
Absolutely.
clearly, with your work, opened that up. But I think that we would just want to hope and pray that now we have, from the people listening to this show tonight, that there are a lot of folks who are saying, okay, put me in the game, coach. I want a chance to do what Oliver does. And let's get at that. So let's just keep making sure through your leadership, Synovia, that we are making the announcement from not only just your group, but all of your sister and brother fraternities and sororities that says, look, we need you. And we know that there's not going to be any supply problem to meet the demand. Todd, you at PGP are really, as I mentioned, experts in this sense of what's happening with misinformation and going on in the world now. Can you just help us how are we going to be able to overcome some of this? I know that you do things, for example, like you are tracking misinformation and then allowing that to be in real time so that people can respond in real time. What are some of the major ways in which we can try to defeat this?
Right. So PGP does monitoring for the CDC. It has a program called Project Vector. So we work with state departments of health. We work with immunization coalitions. And a lot of the idea of tracking mis and disinformation can allow us to get ahead of the conversation, right? So there's the notion of debunking versus pre-bunking, right? Debunking is harder. Once somebody's been impacted by disinformation, trying to then get to them to get to an evidence-based decision is hard, because let's not forget, we don't make decisions with our intellect. Healthcare providers want to go in there and prove them wrong. And let me show you the study. That's not how we make decisions. We make decisions with our values. We make decisions with our beliefs, not so much with our intellect, right? That is secondary. So it is absolutely, like to Synovia's point, absolutely where we have to be with faith-based leaders and community-based leaders. And looking like and coming from the community that you're talking to has immense power. Even though healthcare providers are trusted, there is huge power in community health workers for sure. In Pittsburgh, I think we had Father Abernathy helping the Black community come around with that description that you made, Reed, which was closing the gap, which we had initially, but then going to faith-based leaders, we were able to close it. Same thing in the Somali population with, I think, the imams, and same thing with the Orthodox communication in New York, where they had nurses. I think there were Jewish Orthodox nurses going into those communities to kind of counteract the disinformation. So how do we turn this around? Yes, tracking information is important, but my call to action is that we in 2024 as healthcare providers no longer can have the luxury of just being smart about the science. We have to be trained in communication from medical school, nursing school, pharmacy school, whatever it is, all the way through residencies and even in our attending or professional positions. Look, I'm going to say something real quick to physicians out there. If I said diaphoresis, palpitations, headaches, I even threw in hypertension, you'd say, oh, pheochromocytoma. I'd say, yep, that's right. You get asked that every time you take a board, and it's like 2 to 8 per million. But are you taught to deal with this information, which is like every visit you walk into? No. But I can diagnose the hell out of a neuroendocrine tumor, and I got nothing against neuroendocrinologists. I'm just saying, train us on what's relevant and pertinent. I could look up pheochroma, or at least refer to the ER. They'll make the diagnosis. But I'm on the front lines, and I can't deal with this information.
So, Oliver, as we sort of think about that, I mean, you're sitting on the ACIP of the CDC. This is the place where the science is right there, and all of its complexity and all of its genius. We have to explain to people in our community what an mRNA vaccine is. What is an mRNA? What is a vaccine? What's it going to take for people like you to be able to talk science to our community in a way that the science not only is not frightening, but something that we can be excited about?
Excellent question. Yeah. And first, Todd said something that's crucial. I say it differently. People make decisions with their heart and not their head. So you have to remember that. The other thing, it gets back to being an expert in your field. I mean, you really don't have to go too deep into it. I would just say mRNA is a new technology that is a great way to vaccinate people. I will throw in Kizzy Colbert, who helped develop at NIH, a Black woman out of University of Maryland, Baltimore, which is the Black side of the University of Maryland, was one of the key developers of this new technology. I just say it's new biotechnology. It uses new science to be able to tailor vaccines to be very precise, and it is safe and it is effective, and you need to get it. And I find that if it takes me more than 30 seconds, maybe give them 60 at the max to convince somebody, then it's not going to work. So I think you need to, again, be an expert in your field, understand what an mRNA vaccine is, but with that great understanding, you can then kind of break it down to a computer program. The mRNA is the code for making a particular chemical that will protect you against COVID. Something like that, one sentence, and go from there. But endorse it. Or say, look, this, the world is changing. You get a new computer every 2 years because they're developing so fast. It's just the way science is right now. Hang on or be left behind.
I like that answer. I appreciate it. I want to see if you can get you all to join me. I'm on a crusade to try to get more money, resources, and support for secondary science teaching in our schools. I just think we have to turn off the spigot of stupid. We just got to. And all of science is so complex. Just think about how much of science is genetic and medicine is genetic based today. Just think about the genetic basis of medicine. How are we going to be explaining in a therapeutic way probabilistic statistical decision making with our patients? I mean, we have a lot of work to do. And by the way, when you call the Secondary Science Teachers Association, what they say, first of all, is, hey, why are you calling? Because nobody does. And number two, you're talking about helping to teach about better genetics. I can't get past evolution in our schools. And you're talking, and so you can have then some guy like the Surgeon General in Florida, who can then, come out with his nonsense about, scaring people to death about mRNA vaccines messing with people's DNA. And now we got to spend 12 hours overcoming this kind of stuff. So we're always on our back foot. So I hope you all will join me with that. As I want to just get to one last topic here, and that is, and Sonova, you kind of got at it a little bit earlier, and I really want to nail it even more. And that is the sense that despite all the pain of the pandemic and all the suffering, and let us never forget the loss of life. By the way, let me just intersect here because it's important. Not only did we, and most people don't know this, not only did we close a gap in disparities with primary series vaccination, but by the second year, Black life expectancy was better than white America. Most people don't realize that. And so we have a lot that we came a long way. But now, Sonova, how do we take this tragedy and honor all the lives that have been lost, honor all the work that has been done, as you take yourself off mute? Good.
Okay.
And we now start to look at how do we use this infrastructure, this momentum, to deal with chronic kidney disease, chronic lung disease, chronic heart disease. You know what I'm talking about.
Absolutely. Well, at Good Health Wins and NCNW, we have made a commitment to think about vaccines across the lifespan. And not just during COVID, which is where we started, but we quickly shifted COVID, flu, RSV, pneumococcal, and did now we're doing all vaccines for all populations. So that was an opportunity for us to take this idea of what was really bad that happened with us with COVID, especially disproportionately in African American communities, but to be able to have that broader conversation. We know that we learned that CBOs they have unparalleled power in our communities. And, most people don't know that most of these organizations are over 100 years old. So when COVID came, it wasn't an opportunity, for us, it wasn't about coming into coalition. We just activated our coalition. And at Good Health Wins, we say activate, educate, motivate, celebrate, because there were so many good things that we are learning and how we are positioning vaccines in our communities. Equally important is this amazing partnership that we've been able to have with healthcare providers, especially doctors, especially being able to show people the value of the CDC and ACIP and all these other medical acronyms that you all have. But it's that medical expertise and the credibility to show how we are partnering together that has been super important, especially for our Trusted Messenger Network. And then lastly, I'll just say that doctors, you all provide the clinical knowledge that reassures individuals about the safety and efficacy of relevant and accessible conversations with vaccines. But it's the CBOs that translate that information into the culturally relevant and accessible conversations. So we have to work hand in hand.
Thank you. Dr. Brooks, you know that we often talk about the social determinants of disease, and physicians are beginning now to catch on to the importance of that. How do you sort of see the lessons that we can take home, the infrastructure that we've been building in communities? How do you as a physician see that as being applicable to addressing our chronic and pre-existing problems that unfortunately not only are pre-existing, but are still haunting us with great frequency and consequence?
Right. So the statistics show that the social determinants of health is the primary determinant of health outcomes, not tests that are done, not your genetics, not the best insurance that you have, is the social determinants of health. So it's a very relevant question, Reed. I think the key is collaboration and partnerships. I, as the doctor, can go in and diagnose and treat, advise, refer. I need someone to do the review of the person's social determinants of health. It's called prepare, testing for it. Need them to then, the key is a lot of doctors don't want to do it because it shows that the person that lives in a food desert, doesn't have good transportation, looks in a low-wage job, and doesn't get enough sleep because of all of this. So I can't handle that. So I need a team to help handle that, but you have to put that structure in place. So you have to first recognize that there is an issue with social determinants of health, which is the determinant of health, and then put a plan in place to have have these things addressed. So I would turn to Synovia and say, look, I need some help. I mean, you seem to have all these connections out there. So it all comes from collaboration and partnership. I think that's what we've learned with this pandemic. I say, if there's a lesson learned, is that we can't do it alone. I don't have the social media acumen. I don't have all the connections in the community. I don't have a big team behind me that I need. So I need to get those things. And then I may be the quarterback or the coach, but you call the quarterback nor a coach can win without a team. Okay. You can't get up there.
Before I turn to you, Todd, to lead our lightning round, I'm going to just make one other observation, and that is that not only do we really want to celebrate our community-based organizations, but I do want to put a plug in also for our faith-based organizations. I think that what I've learned through our work with the Choose Healthy Life initiative and others has been the importance of having the pastor sit side by side with the health professional. And instead of having the kind of meetings we used to have in the old days where the pastor would introduce the health professional and then the pastor would sit down in the audience, now we're learning the pastor sits right there with you and participates in the conversation, each sharing their own expertise in real time. I think I'm also wanted to just say that what blackdoctor.org has done as it's partnered with our Black Coalition Against COVID, we had several town halls where the flyer that advertised it had the logo of every single Black fraternal, sorority, social organization you can think. You could not even read the whole. It was just that many. We had one town hall that we did had 800,000+ people on that one town hall. So that gives you a sense of how organized we can be as a Black community. Todd, in our lightning round with 30 seconds, what is the one thing, sir, that you said that you want to double down on, or the one thing that if you don't say it, you'll be kicking yourself in the behind for the rest of the evening?
Communication training is no longer optional. Healthcare providers need to be trained. And to Oliver's point, we need to be trained on social media because people aren't waiting 4.5 months for their next visit to save up all their questions to ask you. They're going here tonight. If we're not there in some capacity, somebody else can answer the question.
Oliver Brooks, the one thing that you want to double down on, or the one thing you sure wish you had said and you'll regret if you don't?
So it's going to be two things. First of all, just a basic fact: the recommendation now for COVID vaccine is 2 if you are 65 years and older, or if you have an immunocompromised condition. So if you're 65 and older, you need 2, and that's a major change, and it's in there now. So the one thing I'll say double down on is science is evolving. And it's accelerating, not just getting faster and faster. You as a person need to evolve in your thought and in the manner in which you live your life and evaluate those things around you, because those are also evolving. There was not misinformation what we're looking at the way it is now. So you got to evolve. You got to keep moving forward. You can look back, learn from the past, but evolve so your present and your future keeps up with the rest of the world.
Synovia, doubling down or wish you had?
I would say that I am excited to say we are better together. And that we have learned that this sustained infrastructure and partnerships, we've learned that it works. We don't have to start this one over to continue the work that we have to do. Thank you.
Well, thank you for a great, great panel and a great conversation. To our audience, do realize that we all are shared together, understanding the consequences of what we do. We understand that the consequences of failure are tragic. The consequences of success are so beautiful. I am particularly struck by Todd's comment earlier this evening in support of a comment I made about the number of states that have anti-vax bills moving forward. In a number of states, every state, he said, has something on the agenda trying to restrict,
School mandate.
For school mandates for vaccines for routine childhood illnesses. This is really, really, really scary. And so we don't have, there's a great song that the civil rights leaders used to always sing. And it's something that I keep in my mind all the time. And that was, ain't no ways tired. And so folks, we can't get tired, not right now. We have to be excellent at all the things we do. We got to keep learning, and we got to keep finding ways of connecting. I want to thank our panelists. I want to thank Moderna for their support. And above all, I want to thank the BDO team. They're just such a wonderful group of folks. They're so good at what they do, and they're making such a difference. Have a good evening, everybody. Take good care.
All right. Thank you.